there's something in the European psyche in which the principle of empire has never gone away. Whenever there's a crisis somewhere in Africa or anywhere else in the world, and the European Union starts thinking, well, how will we react to this crisis? What do? But reach for the former colonial power. So if something happens in Niger, in Senegal, Mali, so on, France must deal with that. If it's Nigeria, the British can do that. It's like the colonial mentality has never gone away. And in Britain, I think there is still a huge imperial mentality in the thought processes within foreign policy. Britain now seems to think that by spending so much on defence, we can have a global role. This thinking has led to the government in the past month announcing £5 billion cut in disability benefits in order to increase defence expenditure. So that means we are impoverishing people with disabilities, retaining a benefit cap on the poorest children in our society in order to pay for more bombs and weapons. Europe is becoming more and more, instead of the prosperous, equality-driven continent it was intended to be, is becoming more and more socially and economically divided as we spend more and more on weapons of war.
Slavery hasn't gone away. Mm-hmm. No, come on. Mm-hmm. Don't be too focused on time scales and periods. History isn't like that.
It was a slave-owning, genocidal country. When I look at my own country, the United States, it is a semi-democratic, white-dominated, hierarchical, racist society that aims to preserve privilege by the elites. That's how it was formed in 1787. It was a slave-owning, genocidal country, killing Native Americans for a white culture. But amazingly, it still looks that way, although we're much more diverse now than we were. The most violent country in the world in the 19th century, by far, was perhaps the most democratic or second most democratic, and that was Britain. You can be democratic at home and ruthlessly imperial abroad. The most violent country in the world since 1950 has been the United States. It's been by far involved
Jeffrey,
in more,
stop
wait,
now.
in more
Let's
wars.
Jeffrey, I'm your moderator, and it's enough.
Okay, I'm done.
So a lot of Westerners see many African people siding with Russia and think that Africans have been propagandized to think that evil Russia is good. But in reality, it is you, Westerner, who has been propagandized to think the West is good and Russia is evil. Because for at least the past 300 years, the big bad guy in Africa has not been Russia, it's been Western Europe and America. I mean, Russia didn't murder and enslave millions of Africans. Western Europe did that. Russia didn't colonize Africa and wipe out and erase thousands of years of culture and heritage and send its people into slave labor camps. The West did that. Russia didn't build roads only from the mines to the ports to facilitate the mass pulverization, ravaging and stripping of Africa's natural resources. The West did that. But do you know what Russia did do? After 1945, when all the colonized people in Africa began to rise up against the British, French, Portuguese, American and Belgian oppressors, do you know who was there giving the freedom fighters guns, ammo, supplies, medical care and training? Russia was. When the ANC began to fight back against the Western-funded apartheid in South Africa, do you know who was there supporting the fight for freedom? Russia was. There is a reason that to this day the flag of Mozambique still has an AK-47 on it. It's because the tools of liberation from the most oppressive occupation in human history came from Russia. So the reason so many African people will laugh in your face, Westerner, when you tell them Russia is evil is because you are the one who is propagandized and has fully consumed fantastical history where the West is somehow the good guy. The reality is, the West has always been the villain in Africa. It is still the villain in Africa. as the West to this day continue to fund violence across African nations and assassinate African leaders, so Western corporations can still steal all of Africa's resources under the cover of mass violence and manufactured instability. So yes, even though the Soviet Union is long gone and the Russia of today is a very, very different place, many Africans will never forget that the only European country that ever showed up for African liberation is Russia, and no amount of Western propaganda will ever erase that fact. Because the only people who believe the West did anything good in Africa are brainwashed Westerners. Anyway, something to think about.
Ibrahim Traore led a coup against a government that was subservient to its foreign masters. You know, there's been many coups across the continent, but usually those just replaced one neo-colonial agent with another, usually. But Ibrahim Traore is different. He's not just changing the government. He is uprooting the whole system of neo-colonial domination, and he's succeeding. He's understood what many people have failed to grasp, which is that independence is meaningless if you don't sever the control of the owners and controllers of global financialized capital. He's understood that security is a myth as long as it depends on the military patronage of your former colonizers. And he's understood that sovereignty is impossible under the shadow of Western tutelage. He's not merely a head of state. Ibrahim Traore is the revolutionary archetype of the 21st century. He was forged in the reality of Western-backed insurgency and Western economic warfare and propaganda. Because, you know, today the fight for freedom is not just waged by armies anymore, but by narratives and by resource policies and by alliances and by collective sovereignty. Traore has made the choice to look towards Russia and Turkey and towards other new centers of power in the multipolar world. That's strategic, not because they're perfect allies, but because he recognizes the necessity of breaking the Western stranglehold on Burkina Faso. This is pragmatism in service to principle. This again is the methodology of Middle Nation. It's engagement without submission, cooperation without subjugation. It's trade-offs without selling out. He also understands, crucially, that Africa's liberation cannot be rented from outside. It has to be rooted in the reclamation of Africa's own wealth. You know, his moves to exert control over Burkina Faso's gold, building indigenous defense capacity and food sovereignty, these aren't just political decisions. These are acts of civilizational self-respect. It's a declaration that Africa's children will no longer be bled dry for the enrichment of Western imperial capital. We see Ibrahim Traore as a brother, not simply because of his faith, but also because of his fight. Because he embodies the spirit of the Quranic guidance to stand firmly for justice, even if it is against your own selves, even if it is against those who are in power, and even if it is against the odds. Burkina Faso isn't just a battleground today for the Burkinabe people. It's the front line in a global struggle for liberation. What Ibrahim Traore is doing is echoing in the Sahel, in Niger, in Mali, across Africa, across the Ummah, across the global south, and across the world. Every oppressed people around the world can now look to Burkina Faso and to Ibrahim Traore and say liberation looks like it's actually possible. But obviously, the global order trembles at the prospect that anyone is going to follow his example. They're afraid of his courage and his clarity and his defiance in the face of Western power and Western threats, and they should be afraid of that. They should tremble because they know the jig is up. But we know that when they get scared, they get dangerous, and Ibrahim Traore is under severe threat. There's already been something like 20 attempts on his life since coming to power. They just stopped a coup from happening last week, organized by the Americans and by the French, right there in the French embassy. Because a free Africa is just something that old wolf can't take. You know, they've been keeping Africa in the past for so long that they know that if they let Africa get away from them, then they're going to be the ones who are consigned to history. The chains that have been holding Africa down all this time are also the only things holding the West up. So now America has said that they want to arrest him. You know, they've already tried to take him out more than once, like I said. Now they're trying to smear him. They're trying to attack him. They sent the head of AFRICOM to the Ivory Coast a couple of days ago. which is a neighbor of Burkina Faso and which is known to have, allegedly anyway, participated in the killing of Thomas Sankara. Allegedly, they participated in the coups or helped to organize the coups against, coup attempts against Ibrahim Traore. And the Western sycophantic leader that was overthrown by Ibrahim Traore is in exile in the Ivory Coast right now. So they're getting ready for something. Understand, Ibrahim Traore isn't just fighting insurgents and militants in the desert. No, every time he has to meet with some Western diplomat or politician or ambassador, he's fighting that same enemy. They're just wearing a suit and tie and meeting in some conference room or some embassy somewhere. But it's the same enemy that he's fighting in the desert. He doesn't have a meeting with any Western official except it's a kind of combat. Imagine, the same ones that are smiling at you or from across the table, those are the same ones who are also paying mercenaries to kill you. Listen, this is important. Burkina Faso is important. Ibrahim Traore is important for everyone, not just for Africans, not just for the Burkinabes. This isn't about idolizing the man. It's about understanding the importance of what he represents. And what he represents is a paradigmatic shift that the whole world needs. You understand me? The OCGFC have been on a path of power consolidation for decades, accumulating more and more power in fewer and fewer hands, and leaving almost nothing beyond their control. We are in a struggle against this consolidation. Do you understand? It's a struggle for decentralization. That's the essence of it. That's what multipolarity is. It's decentralization. We need to pursue, protect, and preserve variance. They don't want there to be any options. They don't want there to be any divergence, any independence. But see, they built their power structure initially on the assumption that American power would last forever. Now they're understanding that they have to recalibrate. They need to transition. It's like they built one of those Jenga towers on a kitchen table, and now they have to relocate it. They have to move that tower all the way across town without it falling apart. Because now you have to move to the global south. It's a completely different terrain than what they're used to. So they're going to try to eliminate as many variables as they can to try to manage this transition so they come out on the top. Because they don't want their tower to fall apart. But if their tower falls apart, that is liberatory for everyone on this planet. Burkina Faso, as I say, represents decentralization. It represents variance. It represents a threat to the power consolidation. They see Ibrahim Traore as a glitch in their system, but their system is a virus on humanity. Burkina Faso represents not only the promise of African liberation, but liberation for all of us. And the instinct for liberation is not a bug in the human software. It's a feature. So everyone should do whatever they can, and we should all do all we can to try to defend and protect Ibrahim Traore. Because wallahi, this is a matter of self-defense. Ibrahim Traore isn't simply a political figure. He's a turning point.
This is not an attack by Putin on Ukraine in the way that we are told every day. This started in 1990, February 9th, 1990. James Baker III, our Secretary of State, said to Mikhail Gorbachev, NATO will not move 1 inch eastward if you agree to German unification, basically ending World War II. And Gorbachev said, that's very important. Yes, NATO doesn't move, and we agreed to German unification. The U.S. then cheated on this, already starting in 1994, when Clinton signed off on basically a plan to expand NATO all the way to Ukraine. This is when the so-called neocons took power. And Clinton was the first agent of this. And the expansion of NATO started in 1999 with Poland, Hungary, and Czech Republic. At that point, Russia didn't much care. There was no border other than with the Königsberg, but other than that, there was no direct threat. Then the U.S. led the bombing of Serbia in 1999. That was bad, by the way. because that was a use of NATO to bomb a European capital, Belgrade, 78 straight days to break the country apart. The Russians didn't like that very much. But Putin became president, they swallowed it, they complained, but even Putin started out pro-European, pro-American, actually. He asked maybe we should join NATO when there was still the idea of some kind of mutually respectful relationship. Then 9/11 came, then came Afghanistan, and the Russians said, yeah, we'll support you, we understand, to root out terror. But then came two other decisive actions. In 2002, the United States unilaterally walked out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty. This was probably the most decisive event, never discussed in this context. But what it did was trigger the U.S. putting in missile systems in Eastern Europe that Russia views as a dire, direct threat. In 2004-05, we engaged in a soft regime change operation in Ukraine. But in 2009, Yanukovych won the election and he became president, and in 2010 on the basis of neutrality for Ukraine. That calmed things down because the U.S. was pushing NATO, but the people of Ukraine on the opinion polls didn't even want to be in NATO. They knew that the country is divided between ethnic Ukrainian, ethnic Russian. What do we want with this? We want to stay away from your problems. So in February 22nd, 2014, the United States participated actively in the overthrow of Yanukovych. A typical U.S. regime change operation, have no doubt about it. And the Russians did us a favor. They intercepted a really ugly call between Victoria Nuland, my colleague at Columbia University now, between her and the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Piat, who's a senior State Department official till today. And they talked about regime change. They said, who's going to be the next government? All of this is to say, the U.S. then said, okay, now NATO's really going to enlarge. And Putin kept saying, stop. You promised no NATO enlargement. It's been, by the way, I forgot to mention, in 2004, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Bulgaria, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia, 7 more countries in the not 1 inch eastward. And then, okay, it's a long story, but the U.S. kept rejecting the basic idea, don't expand NATO to Russia's border in a context where we're putting in goddamn missile systems after breaking a treaty. 2019, we walked out of the Intermediate Nuclear Force Treaty. On December 15, 2021, Putin put on the table a draft Russia-U.S. security agreement. You can find it online. The basis of it is no NATO enlargement. I called the White House that next week after that, begging them, take the negotiations. Putin's offered something, avoid this war. Oh, Jeff, there's not going to be a war. Announce that NATO's not going to enlarge. Oh, don't worry, NATO's not going to enlarge. I said, oh, you're going to have a war over something that's not going to happen? Why don't you announce it? And he said, no, our policy is an open door. This is Jake Sullivan. Our policy is an open door policy. Open door for NATO enlargement. That is under the category of bullshit, by the way. You don't have your right to put your military bases anywhere you want and expect peace in this world. They turned down the negotiations. Then the special military operation started. And 5 days later, Zelensky says, okay, neutrality. And then the United States and Britain said, no way. You guys fight on. We got your back. We don't have your front. You're all going to die. But we got your back as we kept pushing them into the front lines. That's 600,000 deaths now of Ukrainians since Boris Johnson flew to Kyiv to tell them to be brave.
Why did Putin use his jet to take Ibrahim Traore all the way from Burkina Faso to Russia? His jet is considered one of the best jets in the whole world, even better than US Air Force One. The price alone is $600 million. To ensure the safety of anyone who is inside, the jet is fitted with advanced passive missile defense system. So even if someone want to attack them, it will be impossible. The fuselage of this jet is covered with special metal layer, keeping all the passengers safe from external attack. Meaning anyone who is in this jet is 100% safe. This jet has been in service for 20 years. No crashing, no accident or anything at all. It just keeps going numerous upgrades just to keep it better. Now you see how Putin cared for Ibrahim Traore. He used his special jet, his personal jet, to go all the way to Burkina Faso to pick up Ibrahim Traore. On top of that, also 3 fighter jets accompanying the jet to make sure that Ibrahim Traore is 100% safe. Even though the jet alone is safe, he also used 3 fighter jets to accompany the jet.
I'm very worried, obviously, for especially Ibrahim Traore, but all of the leaders in the Sahel. I'm very worried for them, and these leaders need to be protected at all costs. These leaders of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, and Senegal need to be protected at all costs. And I wish that there were some practical steps that I personally could take to try to see to their protection and to emphasize to the Muslims, not just in Africa, but like in the Khalij, in the Gulf, in Turkey, and here in this region, in the Indonesia, Malaysia, Brunei, these regions. Everybody needs to send someone over there just for protection, and not just like literally bodyguards, but I mean to absolutely show 100% solidarity with these people, to say if something happens to them, there will be consequences. We are standing with them, we're standing by them, and their project and what they're starting. We're with them 100%, and we're not going to let anything happen to these men. I really pray for their safety.
Return the gold you took from Burkina Faso's votes. Return the 90% of Niger's uranium profits you still collect. Return the billions in stolen reserves you hold in your banks. Return the artifacts you used to decorate your guilt. You say, but this is complicated. Now what's complicated is justifying why a former colonizer still profits from its colonies decades after independence. You say it's legally ours, then your laws are written in the language of thieves. You say it's not that simple, but it was simple when you took it. Friends, this is not just about money. It is about restoring spiritual balance. It is about putting fire to the illusion that you can erase a crime by calling it history. We are not chasing revenge. We are proclaiming rebirth. Africa is not rising to destroy. Africa is rising to rebuild. But no house can stand on soil where ghosts still roam free. No nation can thrive while its soul is still held hostage in the vaults of its oppressor. So choose your path. You can meet this moment with cordial return. What you stole, acknowledge what you did, and finally walk alongside Africa as equals. Or you can resist, you can stall, you can cling to illusions of empire and a world that has already moved on. But know this, whether you choose repentance or resistance, the outcome will be the same. Africa will rise, with or without you, and when we do, it will not be in your image but in our own. Not with your approval, but with our ancestors' blessing. You once called us the dark continent, but look again. The darkness is receding, and it is your lies that are being exposed to the sun. Return what you stole, or face the reckoning that history has long promised.